And so we're doing a class right now that is called Self-Mastery, if you don't know that. And so really, self-mastery, I think, begins within. And it begins within, and part of that withinness is really about being the change we wish to see in the world. Through our thoughts and our actions and our words, being that. And so it takes tenacity, and it takes responsibility, and it takes practice and dedication and discipline to actually make those changes within ourselves so that we act as that change that we wish to see. Spiritually motivated actions are the thing that creates that change that we want to see. And so our spiritual and our personal morality and our spiritually motivated actions don't come out of a book. They actually come out of being deeply connected to our own self, that inner self, that divine self. And then being congruent in our words and our thoughts and our actions with what it is that we actually believe inside of ourselves. And so this class that we're doing, Self-Mastery, is based on the book, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, and the teachings of the Science of Mind or Centers for Spiritual Living. And so the agreement that we looked at this week was the third agreement, which is make no assumptions. So does anybody here ever make assumptions? Like every day? You know, it's amazing, really, how many assumptions we make on a daily basis. We assume that other people know what we think and how we feel about stuff, especially the people that are close to us. We assume that people know what is important to us and why it's important. We assume if someone loves us, then they really know how we think or feel and shouldn't have to ask. We think, this is the worst one, is if I have to ask, it doesn't count. All those are based on assumptions and making assumptions, right? I assume, if you don't know, I work as a hairdresser part-time. I assume that my clients know that it's important to be on time so that I'm not running behind the rest of the day because I'm booked solid. Maybe you assume that your spouse knows you do not like breadcrumbs left on the counter in the kitchen, or you don't like shoes laying around the house. You think they ought to know that. You're assuming they should know that, and you're actually assuming they should agree with you also. And if they don't agree with you, then you get irritated and annoyed with them. Perhaps you assume that one of your friends should know that it hurts your feelings that she never invites you over to her house. We have all sorts of assumptions we make. And so the title of my talk today is that really so? Because really that's what we should be asking ourselves is that really so? Instead of making the assumptions that we make. We think that people can read our minds. So there's a mental telepathy joke. Have you ever heard it? You want to hear the mental telepathy joke? We do that. We think people can read our minds. The other thing that we do is we assume that we know what other people think and feel. That we know what their motivations are, or what's important to them. And then we make assumptions that are really not based on what they think or feel, but they're based on what we think. And then we think that that's true about them, but really it's just something that we think. Maybe you think that your roommate hasn't talked to you this morning because she's mad at you. You're assuming that, when in reality she didn't sleep well last night and has a headache. Or maybe you are assuming the person who's driving the Tesla next to you has it made, and that their life is easier than yours and that they are very happy. Or perhaps you think, like I do, that people see political issues and social issues the same way that you do in the world, and then you're shocked when you find out they don't see things the same way that you do. Do you do that? I do that all the time. So why do we make those assumptions? You know why? Because we hate uncertainty. We hate not knowing. We hate not having the answer. We hate ambiguity. We hate when things don't feel solid, the ground doesn't feel solid that we're standing on, because we really want to stand on solid footing. Because standing on that solid footing and being sure about things makes us feel safe. That solid footing makes everything safe. Therefore, we want everything in its little box, and we want all of those little ducks in a row, because then, when it's in its box, we know exactly where it is and what it is, and then we can deal with it. But that need to know, and that need to understand, and that need to stand on solid footing causes us to make assumptions. We fill in the blanks. We make up a story, all so that we can feel secure and so that we know that we can deal with things. Things feel safe. The problem is we believe they're true. We believe those stories that we make up and those blanks that we fill, and we believe that they're true. Sometimes we don't even realize that we're actually making assumptions. We just assume and that we just think that it's real. And so there's a story that says, one fine day a bus driver went to the bus garage, started his bus, and began driving his bus along his regular route. No problems for the first few stops. Few people got on, a few got off. Things went generally well. At the next stop, however, a big hulk of a man got on. 6'8", built like a wrestler, arms almost hanging down to the ground. He glared at the driver as he got onto the bus and said, "Big John doesn't pay," and went and sat down in the back of the bus. The next day, the same thing happened. Big John got on, and again he said, "Big John doesn't pay," and went and sat down. And the next day, and the next day, and the one after that, and so forth. This irritated the bus driver. Starting to lose sleep over it, Big John was taking advantage of his size. Finally, he could stand it no longer. He signed up for bodybuilding classes, karate, judo, all the good stuff. And by the end of summer, he had become quite strong. Because did I tell you that he's only 5'3" and a really slim and small guy? So by the end of summer, he had become quite strong. So the next Monday, when Big John got on the bus and said, "Big John doesn't pay," the driver stood up and glared back at him and menacingly said, "And why not?" With a surprised look on his face, Big John replied, "Big John has a bus pass." Make up this big story. So, in reality, what we're doing is we're just guessing at what might be true. In reality, we're just projecting our values and our feelings and our fears and our thoughts and our feelings and our rules onto other people, and then assuming those things about them. But here's the thing. If your assumption isn't true, your roommate isn't mad at you, but in fact she didn't sleep well last night, you're creating stress and angst for yourself, all for nothing, right? And so Ruiz says in his book, The Four Agreements, we make assumptions, we take it personally, then we react. This creates a whole big drama for nothing. If others tell us something, we make assumptions. If they don't tell us something, we make assumptions to fulfill our need to know and replace the need to communicate. Even if we hear something and we don't understand, we make assumptions about what it means, and then we believe those assumptions. We make all sorts of assumptions because we don't have the courage to ask questions. So he says we don't have the courage to ask questions. Why don't we just ask for clarification in those times? I think we don't want to risk being vulnerable. With that person at work you think's mad at you, you don't want to risk putting yourself on the line to ask the question. You don't want to risk being rejected. Maybe you don't want to risk finding out that you really aren't going to get what you want. Maybe you don't want to risk being disappointed. If I risk asking my best friend why she never invites me over for lunch, maybe she will actually tell me that our relationship isn't that important to her. Or maybe if instead of assuming your husband sits in front of the TV all day because he doesn't love you anymore and you ask him, maybe you're going to find out that's exactly what he says. I really don't love you anymore. So it's like we're too afraid to ask the question because we're afraid that we're going to be disappointed, that we're going to get hurt, that we're not going to get what we want, just being vulnerable and having to put ourselves on the line. But here's the thing. This is the big thing. Without asking that person the question, you're already living as if it's true. You're already the worst case scenario. You're already calling and living in suffering without asking the question. Do you get that? If you don't ask the question, you can't deal with it. If you don't ask the question, you can't find the resolution or the solution or the answer to fix what isn't working. So the conclusion that I've drawn is really, if we don't ask the question because we're afraid of the answer, or what we're afraid of, we're already experiencing in our thoughts, in our emotions, in our feelings, in our bodies, we're already experiencing it as if it's already happening, then the most loving thing that we can do for ourselves is to actually ask the question. Does that make sense? And the most loving thing that we can do for ourselves is to really ask the hardest questions. The one that you really don't want to ask, that is the one that is most loving to ourselves because it takes us out of the angst and the concern, the anxiety, the stress that we are creating for ourselves in that story. Because we've already made up a story. We're already living in the angst. That is just torturing ourselves. Because what we really want is to be at peace. What we really want is to live in a state of certainty. What we really want is to understand. What we really want is to feel safe. And on a level underneath all of that, what we really want is to be able to express from our spirit. That means to express from love, from our own spiritual well-being. But when we're in that story, we can't do that because we're in angst and stuff instead. In the Science of Mind textbook, Ernest Holmes says, "We never associate warriors with the divine kingdom. Struggle and strife are outside the kingdom. They cannot enter in because of their confusion. Only peace can enter the gates of reality," with a capital R, which really means only peace can enter the gates of spirit and sit at the table of love. The divine host serves not its bounty to confusion, but distributes its gifts to those who enter its gates with peace in their minds and love in their hearts. We can't feel spirit in our lives or feel our own spirits when we're in that story and when we're in angst and in fear and in turmoil. The thing that takes us out of that turmoil is actually not making the assumption in the first place and just talking about it with someone. When we cease making assumptions, we move ourselves to a higher level of care. When we cease to make assumptions, we move our relationships to a higher level of care. That requires, though, in order to be vulnerable and to have those conversations, it requires that we be anchored in our own beingness. It requires that we be anchored in our own spiritual wholeness. in our own spiritual power, our own wholeness, our own enoughness. Having the courage to ask the questions requires that we have secure footing within ourselves. Where you know that you are okay. And that all requires spiritual practice. In order to have that sense of your own beingness and your own wholeness and your own enoughness and your own solidness requires spiritual practice. Because it requires knowing who you are and knowing whose you are. You already live in the kingdom with all the resources that you could ever possibly need. Walking this spiritual path and being the change that you wish to see in the world requires that we remember from whence we have come and that we act from that place. Living with your body in the world and your feet deeply rooted in spirit is what is required. When we're anchored in the truth of who we are, it's easy to ask the questions because it doesn't matter what the answer is then. Because we can handle it, because we are strong and secure and whole. We are enough in that place, and in that place our own essential nature is love. The truth is, life does not happen to us. It happens through us. And that each and every single one of us is responsible for our own life experience. And that everything is a part of our spiritual path. As we come from that place of love towards ourselves and others, we increase our own sense of well-being. As we come from that place of love towards ourselves and others, we increase our light. As we come from that place of love towards ourselves and others, we increase the gift that we are in this world. We increase the beneficial presence that we're being. We increase our own life experience. And as we come from that place of love towards ourselves and others, we are the change we wish to see in the world. And so my invitation to you this week is to love yourself enough to ask the questions, to ask for clarification, to get clear until everything is clear, to ask for what you want and what you need, and don't expect somebody to read your mind, to raise yourself and your relationships to a higher level of care. And then you'll be living with a greater sense of peace and a greater sense of ease and being the change that we all wish to see in the world. And so thank you all, and blessings to every single one of you on this path of awakening to your own spirit, awakening to the presence of God that is always right where you are, and to being that change in this world. Blessings to all of you. And so I invite you to join me in an affirmative prayer. And so I just turn my attention right now to that omnipresence of spirit, that one presence and power, that one life, that one beingness that is infinite in its nature, that is the absolute energy of intelligence and wisdom and love and good without bound. It is that from whence we have come, and it is that which supports us and maintains us and sustains us. It is that which lifts us and carries us, that guides us and directs us, and speaks within our hearts and our minds as the truth of our own wholeness, as the truth of our own enoughness, as the truth of our own safety and security and eternal well-being. For it is from here that we have power to move through in and through this world in a very powerful way. That we can move in and through this world with our own self-confidence and our own self-assurance, and ask the hard questions and be present in and from love and be the change we wish to see in the world. And so I know that we are always within that presence, and that presence is always within us, stirring and speaking. And so today we listen within, and we hear, "Thou art whole, and thou art mine." Here, all is well. Here, we are safe. And from here, we have much to give and much to share and much to be in this world. And so what a blessing it is to just be in recognition of this truth. And so I know that everywhere we go, in everything that we do, that one divine presence walks with us and walks in us and walks as us and blesses all of those that we come in contact with. For from here, it is easy to come from compassion and care and kindness. And so it is with a heart filled with gratitude and filled with truth that I release this prayer into that creative law of the universe, knowing that it is taken a hold of and it is unfolding everywhere we look, all around us. And so I stand committed to living this life of spirit. I stand in recognition that this is all there is and all there is to do. And I recognize that we are blessed. And so I release this prayer in gratitude, and I let it be, and I say, and so it is.